International Pollutants Elimination Network, IPEN. IPEN is a global network of public interest NGOs in more than 125 countries. And we warm welcome both to you here in this room, but also to the online participants that are following this event. I'm gonna remind everyone that this event will be recorded, so you know that you can look at it once more or 2 times more afterwards, and also share it with your friends and colleagues. The event today is focused on the 2025 and 2028 elimination dates for PCBs. And the speakers today will provide different insights into this. It's a focus on non-combustion techniques and the need for a greater role in eliminating PCBs for non-combustion techniques. We will have an IPEN representative who talks about the impact on the ground of PCB exposure and how that PCBs contaminate the food chain. And he will also discuss how non-combustion technologies can address that type of contamination and break the cycle of POPs pollution. We also have presentations from 2 non-combustion technology developers who will elaborate on the potential for their technologies to address PCB and POPs destruction. I do want to clarify that IPEN is an independent NGO network, so we don't partner or endorse or have any financial relationships with any industry groups or companies, but we do feel it's important to raise awareness about the type of technologies that we have or that have demonstrated that can potentially destroy POPs in a sustainable and environmentally sound manner. So our speakers today is Mr. Lee Bell, who is Mercury and POPs advisor for IPEN. We have Griffins Ochieng, who is the executive director for the Center of Environmental Justice and Development in Kenya. We have Sergi Albino, the founder and CEO of EcoSpheres. And we have Dr. Douglas Hallett, who is the chairman and CEO of True Energy. My name is Sarah Brochet, and I am science advisor to IPEN. Lee will go more into the potential of the non-combustion destruction technologies. We will, as I mentioned, hear more about POPs in plastics and consumer products from Kenya. And then we will have our 2 presentations focusing on specific technologies. We will wait with any questions until the end, so we can get all the presentations going. So please take a note of any questions that you have throughout these presentations, so you can bring them up. And for online participants, you can also provide questions. They will be sent to me, and I will ask our panel. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Lee Bell to give his presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome everyone. It's good to see so many delegates and observers here today. We all know that we have a real challenge ahead of us in trying to reach the goals of the Stockholm Convention for the elimination of PCBs by 2028. And what I wanted to do today was to bring together probably something that's more novel compared to traditional destruction technologies, and I'll talk about some of the problems associated with those, but to talk about the potential of non-combustion destruction technologies, which I think we need to have more awareness of, both at a policy level and in terms of implementation on the ground. So what are non-combustion technologies for PCB destruction? There are a range of different technologies. There are quite a few of them. They can destroy PCBs and other POPs waste. Some are specific to certain POPs. Some can treat a wide range of POPs. One of the most common and attractive features of these technologies is that they do not release unintentional POPs such as dioxins and furans in their emissions and residues. which is a clear advantage over traditional technologies. They're capable of flexible applications, and they can often be moved to the site of the PCB or other contaminated waste stockpiles instead of shipping the waste long distances, which is a key issue in relation to the proximity principle and also in terms of cost saving and reducing risk. There is a few copies still remaining. They've been very popular, but there's a few copies of this report on non-combustion technologies for POPs waste destruction in hard copy, I think near the door of the room. And you can also visit the IPEN booth to pick up associated materials or visit the IPEN website at IPEN, www.ipen, to access those as well. So we're all aware that PCB elimination needs to be accelerated rapidly. We have a significant problem. In the previous assessment in 2017, with the PCB Elimination Network, reported that we'd only moved up to about 17% of PCB contaminated wastes to having been destroyed, leaving 83% or around about 14 million tonnes remaining to be eliminated. But there's a high degree of uncertainty around these figures, and I'll explain why in a moment. In looking at documents presented at this COP, the report on progress towards the elimination of PCBs hints at some of the issues. Many countries have actually not reported their inventories or lack the capacity to analyse and identify PCB wastes, especially contaminated soils and sediments. And so they either have undeveloped inventories or incomplete inventories, which limits the accurate reflection of what's out there and what's been treated. We have, in the top table, you can see that we have 53 of the parties to the convention have developed inventories, and the total amount of PCB waste eliminated, the estimates are around about 593,000 tonnes, and in inventory stocks awaiting destruction, we have around 640,000 tonnes. When you compare that to the global reported production of PCBs, which is between 1 and 1.5 million tonnes, it presents a reasonable figure, but the key issue is that that's pure PCB that was produced, and it's been diluted both through transformer oils and leaked into the environment, into contaminated soils. And so you have contaminated equipment, contaminated soils, contaminated sediment, and that's why we start looking at an estimated figure of something like 14 million tonnes remaining to be destroyed. In the little pie graph, you probably can't read the numbers from there, and I couldn't format them any better. But what it effectively says is that there's 45% in terms of completed inventories, there are 45 completed inventories, there's 40 preliminary inventories, 22 under development, and either no reporting from 65 parties or no inventories from 13 parties. So you can see why the figures are unreliable in a sense, just because the inventories remain undeveloped in a lot of cases at this point. So in terms of a quick analysis of that data, we started in 2017 with an estimate of 14 million tonnes. Since the last report to the COP in 2019, more PCB waste has been destroyed, and locally or within countries, 151,000 tonnes has been destroyed. Exports have dropped significantly to around 37,500 tonnes for a total of around 190,000 tonnes of PCBs. And we still have 640,000 tonnes sitting in inventories waiting to be shipped or destroyed. As I mentioned, pure PCB has been diluted widely into products, equipment, and the environment. What's more commonly inventoried are the transformers and other contaminated equipment and products, and PCB contaminated oils. What's not necessarily inventoried, but often still requires treatment, is contaminated sites and the soil within them. And that includes things like building rubbles and other infrastructure that's been contaminated in the process, contaminated sediments and open application wastes, which are very difficult to deal with, such as PCB-based paints and caulking or sealing materials that are used in buildings. Getting away from the statistics and back to real life, what we're seeing is ongoing food chain impacts of PCBs. Just in terms of the top trophic level creatures that are suffering the most, apart from humans. At the moment, we're seeing problems with cetaceans. We're seeing initially after the ban of PCB through the convention that there was a drop in levels, but they've now plateaued. And what we're really seeing now is the movement of PCBs through the environment from residual sediment and soil contamination into the oceans and entering the food chain. And that's why a lot of these creatures are not dropping in terms of their body burden of PCBs. And unfortunately, the consequences are quite devastating. This is the case of one of the UK's or the Scotland's killer whale population, Lulu, who'd been a favourite of scientists and the public for a long period of time. Lulu suddenly died and was found to have shocking levels of PCB in her blubber. The levels of PCB contamination were incredibly high, surprisingly so. They were 20 times higher than the safe level that would be expected for cetaceans to be able to manage. And that puts this particular killer whale as one of the most contaminated animals on the planet, according to a leading veterinary pathologist. Another scientist who's studied the life of these creatures points out that it looks like, because of PCBs, that Scotland's killer whale population is likely to go extinct. Humans are no less susceptible as a top-level feeder in the food chain. There are a list of different impacts: liver disorders, failures of reproduction, cancers, hormone system disruption, suppressed immune systems, and cancers yet again. But an interesting point is the circular graph in the corner, which points out that 96% of our exposure to dioxins is through food. The food chain is the most important vector and a serious problem in this respect. IPEN has been heavily involved in sampling of the food chain for PCBs, and our global studies were recently combined into a meta-study, and 127 pooled egg samples using the flocks of 113 free-range chicken flocks at different locations around the globe were analysed. And the analysis, which was published in Emerging Contaminants, found that in nearly 90% of the areas studied, levels of dioxins and dioxin-like PCBs in free-range eggs exceeded the EU regulatory food limits. And this has major implications, particularly for children exposed to eating eggs contaminated with PCBs, but it also affects dairy products, other forms of livestock, and other elements of our food chain. My colleague Griffins will be presenting a new IPEN report detail from Kenya, which also confirms serious PCB food chain contamination. So which technologies currently destroy POPs? You will find them in the general technical guidelines for the environmentally sound management of waste consisting of containing or contaminated with POPs. There is a table in there, table 4, which includes all the currently listed technologies for destruction of POPs. It is not exhaustive, and there is a process whereby new technologies can be added over time. So the table is somewhat limited. Unfortunately, waste incinerators, cement kilns, and metallurgy plants are included in this list. They are the combustion technologies. And the problem with them is that they, when they burn POPs waste, they create unintentional POPs like dioxin, both in emissions and in residues like cement kiln dust and in the bottom ash and fly ash of incinerators. This is acknowledged within the technical guidelines, but also within the fact that these are listed as major dioxin and other PCB sources in annexes to the convention. These UPOPs go on to pollute soils, build up in the food chain and increase human exposure as many of the ash materials and the deposition from emissions ends up in the soil. They also produce very large greenhouse gas emissions. So some of the barriers to PCB waste destruction in this particular format relate to things like disposal costs and shipping and insurance costs, which sometimes exceed the destruction costs, a lack of facilities to destroy POPs in the global south, which is necessitating shipment to the north, with more than 90% of exported PCBs for destruction, PCB waste, being destined to 7 countries in Europe. There is also the lack of analytical ability to identify PCB waste in many countries, which makes it difficult to characterize contaminated sites. And you can see there the flow of PCB and PCB wastes to Europe for destruction, predominantly in cement kilns and incinerators. So the benefits of mobile non-combustion technologies over fixed combustion technologies are obvious in that cement kilns and incinerators are typically static facilities, expensive to construct and maintain. They release UPOPs, and in many countries they actually don't meet the BAT-BEP standards to minimise UPOPs emissions. So what's needed is more mobile, transportable and relocatable destruction technologies that do not emit UPOPs, and it's needed to take that destruction capacity to the waste rather than shipping waste long distances. So flexibility, modularity and transportability are needed to meet both the proximity principles in the convention and to avoid the hazard and cost of shipping PCBs overseas so that they can be destroyed faster. Some of the technologies which will be described today are included here. The guidelines I mentioned before include a number of different non-combustion technologies such as alkali metal reduction, gas phase chemical reduction, which you can see in the photo, base catalyzed decomposition, supercritical water oxidation is also commercially available, and catalytic hydrodeschlorination. There are quite a few more. Some that will be discussed today include the ecospheres technology to remove dioxins and PCBs from underwater sediment and destroy it. There is mechanochemical destruction using a term known as tribolosis in some fields where they use ball mills and reagents to destroy POPs. Electrochemical oxidation is emerging as a technology for PFAS destruction, and solvated electron technology also deals with some POPs. Gas phase chemical reduction actually was established in my hometown of Perth, Western Australia in the 1990s. It is listed as being able to destroy all POPs. It has fairly low costs compared to incinerator construction. No high levels of pre-treatment are required for the waste, and it can be used on site for contaminated soil. But Dr. Doug Hallett will speak to that in some detail. Supercritical water oxidation, I mentioned before, started out at very small scale as laboratory practices 30 or 40 years ago, and has now reached the stage of commerciality, and it is transportable. It can be used to destroy not just POPs, but hazardous waste and chemical weapons. So it has a range of different applications that are attractive to governments around the world. It can be moved in these mobile containerized units to access difficult locations. I have also seen it applied on vessels in the sea for chemical waste destruction. It doesn't have hazardous emissions or residues, and some earlier studies found that the installation costs were 15% less expensive, and the running costs were 10% of the costs of incineration of hazardous liquids. It's used extensively by the US military for destruction of hazardous waste and chemical weapons, including mobile ship-based units. I'd like to just talk briefly about treatment trains, which are not one single technology, but combinations of processes. In this case, I've used the example from ecospheres and included their UV advanced oxidation processes. The first step is that contaminants are absorbed from sediment into specially designed solvent-filled polymer spheres that are inserted into the sediment. And the affinity of PCBs and dioxins for both polymers and solvents draws the contaminants into the spheres and out of the sediment. And in step 2, the spears are decanted and the solvent's destroyed in an oxidation process. The major advantage is to eliminate dredging of sediment and the common impact, which is resuspension of the PCB in the water column, which impacts biota, further impacting the food chain. That's one of the two-step processes. The second is the use of, and I'm sorry about all the acronyms, but it's hard to fit them on a slide sometimes, and the photos are more interesting. So in this case, ITDU, which is indirect thermal desorption units, and BCD, which is base catalyzed decomposition, is a two-step process. And this was used for treating very heavily contaminated materials in Spalana in the Czech Republic, Czechia. In step 1, the POPs removal occurs within the indirect thermal desorption unit. Direct thermal desorption units are more problematic, and the reason why is because when you heat them with natural gas or something like that, the process, the heating emissions mix with the actual contaminated waste emissions from the process, resulting in the need to scrub and treat very large volumes of contaminated off-gas. With indirect thermal desorption, the heating process is separated from the waste. So you don't get the exhaust gas from, say, using gas to heat the system. It doesn't mix with the contaminated gas inside the desorption unit. And the idea is effectively to heat the contaminated material until the contaminants are released in a gas phase because of their volatility, and then it is collected at the end of the process and condensed into a very small amount of concentrated POPs. You then take the concentrated POPs and then you destroy them in a secondary process. So in step 2, in this case, it was using base catalyzed decomposition, and you don't have vast volumes of material to treat. The initial step here involved large amounts of concrete rubble that was contaminated with dioxin. So in many cases, technologies, it's very difficult to feed them with that kind of bulk material. So this is a process of concentration and then destruction. As I mentioned, if you'd like to read more about these different technologies, it's available on the IPEN website, and we will be updating and reviewing that document periodically to ensure that we capture new and emerging technologies. So actually, I know someone was looking for a photo then. I'm going to skip back, you're okay. So I'd like to thank you for your attention in this regard, but I'd like to make one more comment which just relates to opportunities for parties to implement non-combustion technologies. There are programs with the GEF and with UNIDO looking at technology transfer for non-combustion technologies, and some of those have already been funded, but we would like to see a much wider rollout and much more funding involved so that we can look at trying to meet that 2028 deadline for destruction. And I believe there's currently a process in the Philippines destroying PCBs via this type of non-combustion process. And one final point is I'd just like to mention that there will be a video presented on hydrogen reduction processes, and our speaker will be joining us remotely, but there is a representative from that company and who can speak to you about the technology directly, and that's Alex Mihailovic over here in the corner, if you'd like to talk to him afterwards. So thank you very much for that, and I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Lee. We will take questions and comments to all the presentations after we're done with all the presentations. So please make sure to make a note of any questions or comments you have throughout, and we will come back to them. And that goes also for online participants. You can send in your questions and they will be sent to me and I will ask them to the panel. We will now move on to Mr. Griffiths Ochieng from Center for Environmental Justice and Development in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to present findings of a project or a report that was done in the context of a project that is ongoing in Kenya, where we analyzed and sampled plastic materials, consumer products, and also free-range chicken for POPs in them. So this project objective was to reduce and eliminate the production, trade, and use of toxic non-circular plastics and plastics that cannot be recycled due to the content of hazardous chemicals and protect the integrity of a non-toxic circular economy. The project objectives were to collect information and assess plastic waste management schemes in Kenya, and out of that, develop a national assessment of policies and reports on the plastic waste management. We sampled through pilot monitoring of hazardous chemicals, of which I'm going to share the findings in plastics, and also monitoring the food chain contamination. Second is present this information and best practices and national financing regulation schemes by producing evidence-based policy recommendations, particularly in the context of a number of reforms on waste management in Kenya, including development of EPR, extended producer responsibility regulations, new waste management law. So how do we share this evidence to inform that process? And also presenting this at national level in meetings. We've shared these preliminary findings at the national level in preparations to these scopes, but also to elevate the non-hazardous chemical recycling and financial schemes for developing markets by developing a global report aggregating the results in Kenya, which is now has been shared by Lee, which IPEN has done, and also from other countries that IPEN has also been able to conduct this. And also, of course, presenting this to expert meetings and providing policy recommendation to provide a framework for phase out of non-circular plastics. The output or expected outcomes is to establish national data in Kenya for phase out of non-circular plastics, and also phase out non-circular plastics and the use of extended producer responsibility schemes, as I just said, in the context of the process of development in the country, but also to enhance this within the ongoing conversation. Now we're talking about the Basel Convention, PCB elimination, as well as the other processes like SICAM. So in terms of consumer or plastic consumer products and free-range chicken eggs, we looked at hotspots where there is e-waste management and disposal or refurbishment in Kenya, and I will speak more about that. The aim was to determine whether we have, well, POPs find their way in consumer products and the human food chain, either through recycling or dumping or burning practices in waste management, but also contribute to setting appropriate international standards and limits for content of POPs. This is informed by the discussions on the POP waste content limits in the technical guidelines, which are ongoing discussions here. For the free-range chicken sampling, we pulled samples from free-range chicken, which we collected in the vicinity of potential POPs pollution hotspots in Kenya. So this is 4 main sites. There was in Nairobi. We have the dump site of the landfill. We have an area within the, downtown Nairobi where there's e-waste dismantling, which is called the Ngara Market. We have also a site in Nairobi where we have a community cooker, where they are burning or using the community cooker to produce fuel for cooking in a school. And we also had a site slightly out of in the central province where we had the issue of open burning or of waste to produce or make building blocks. So these samples were analyzed in a certified laboratory in the Czech Republic, Netherlands, and Germany. Daily dietary intake was calculated for dioxins and dioxin like PCBs, PFOS, the results of which were compared or calculated in tolerable daily intake established by different regulatory authorities. So the list of POPs that were tested presented here. We had the PCBs, the dioxins, PCB like dioxin like PCBs, short chain chlorinated paraffins, PFOS, among others, in the different samples that we took. So in terms of the findings, the analyzed levels or POP levels in the eggs from the selected hotspots in Kenya exceeded many times the levels, particularly from the control sample that we were bought in a supermarket in Nairobi. The levels of dioxin, like PCB congeners, measured in both samples from the Ngara market, which at the highest level, were the highest ever measured in free-range chickens globally, based on studies that IPEN has conducted. The levels of indicator PCB congeners in the two pool eggs from the Ngara market exceeded the EU regulatory limit of 40 nanograms per gram fat by more than 30 to 55 times. The level of indicator PCB congeners in the eggs from Dandora reached half of the EU limit. So this graph shows, in comparison with other studies that IPEN has done globally in different countries, and the levels from the site in Kenya where there's this dismantling of e-waste and other, within the downtown Nairobi had the highest levels, compared also with another study that IPEN did where there is also e-waste handling in Ghana, in Africa as well. In terms of comparison with the threshold, particularly the levels of dioxins in the free-range samples were 2 of the 8 higher than the EU regulatory limit. The highest levels was in the eggs from Dandora, as would be expected because of the issue of waste management practices, particularly burning, followed by eggs that were from the Ngara market and also Mirema. These are sites that we have, combustion or open burning. Rather, for instance, in the Mirema where we had this community cooker, and in Ngara where there's different type of practices where there will also be burning. Based on the above, the average per capita consumption of eggs in Kenya is 36 eggs per year, would exceed the total for dioxin and PCB, dioxin like PCB by 5 to 6 times. In addition, we can also say that a person eating 1 egg from Ngara market would be exposed to a cumulative dose of dioxins and dioxin-like compounds that would span nearly 200 days to more than 250 days. I'll share more on the POPs in plastics, where we sampled a number of plastic consumer products, and some of the pictures of the samples we took in Kenya, both from the markets. So we sampled 18 black plastic products which are from recycled e-waste plastics and plastic from end-of-life vehicles, are found to have elevated levels of bromine and antimony were purchased from markets in Kenya. The laboratory analysis was conducted in the university in Czech Republic. So it tested for groups of pentabrominated diethyl ethers, among other POPs were analyzed in these products. Atoica was also analyzed for brominated dioxins at the laboratory in Germany. The results are that of the 18 samples of the products made of recycled black plastics, 14 of them exceeded the EU safety standard of 10 parts per million. Across all the 18 samples, there were 6 novel brominated flame retardants found at concentrations ranging from 0.2 to 412 parts per million. One sample, Atoica, was analyzed for brominated dioxins and was found to contain 6,590 toxic equivalent grams, which is much higher than the concentration observed in many waste incineration ashes. So in conclusion, leakage and the emissions of POP additives from waste is a source of contamination for free-range chicken eggs with brominated flame retardant and PFOS in the vicinity of dump sites or community cookers, where these are used for fuel, which is one that we discourage as we continue to have discussions even at national level. These technologies that promote burning of thermal consumption of management of plastic waste. All form of burning of plastic waste, including their use as fuel, should be banned, as this releases POPs in the environment. Waste containing high levels of POPs can be treated by non-combustion technologies, which destroy POPs and do not generate new POPs, as we'll hear more from this panel. Studies shows that children toys, accessories, office supplies, and utensils in the market are affected by unregulated recycling of e-waste, plastics, which contain toxic chemicals, a discussion that we continue to have on how we're able to regulate, particularly the management of e-waste in the context of the new extended producer responsibility and other laws that Kenya is developing. To stop this practice, we proposing or concluding that stricter measures for control of brominated flame retardants in products and the waste need to be set and enforced. The results of this study highlight, that the new plastic treaty should also focus particularly on the chemical content in plastics. The recommendations that we put forward is that it's need to hold the entry of plastic treated with brominated flame retardants for recycling into toys and other consumer products, setting strict limit for POPs in waste, using separation techniques for POP waste, a method that we're gonna hear more from this discussion. And also restricting the brominated flame retardants as a class. Only a class-based approach can address these regrettable substitutes and likely toxic chemicals in them. But also regulating and controlling plastic waste in general, especially facilities that are used, they're used as fuel for cooking or other forms of management of the plastic waste. And more on the use of non-combustion technologies that I would not talk more about, but we will hear from other speakers today. So with that, I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Griffiths. I am sure you will get a lot of questions after all our speakers are done when it's time for the Q&A. Before we go to our next speaker, I would like to repeat something I said in the introduction, since I do believe we have some new participants. This is a slightly unusual setup for IPEN as an independent civil society public interest organization. So I do want to, again, say that IPEN does not endorse any specific company. We don't partner with companies. But we do think it's important to highlight the existing technologies that are around to treat POPs with non-combustion techniques. So we are very pleased to be able to welcome Sergi Albino as our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, friends. In 2018, EcoSpheres was founded with a single principle of ending forever chemicals by cleaning soil and water without sacrificing clean air. So all of our technologies was birthed from the confines of NASA Kennedy Space Center, well, some of them, because we've practiced quite a bit of sustainability efforts as we develop life sciences for space exploration. So essentially, that's how we came about as a company. And I'll talk a little bit more about NASA and NASA Technology Transfer Office in a little bit. Forever chemicals, specifically PCBs that we're discussing here today, dioxins and other types of POPs. Unfortunately, it does not discriminate. It doesn't know of any kind of borders. And I'm encouraged here this week to be part of this group to see so many people from around the world working together to combat this legacy contamination. Because there's more coming. PFAS, as we know it, is coming about. And more regulations are coming to that. But for now, let's stick to the topic of PCBs. By the way, that's the map of the United States where I'm going to focus the majority of my talk this afternoon. And you could pretty much tell where the major cities and industrialization occur, right? By the levels of contamination within the country. Existing solutions are costly and environmentally damaging. I think we all know what landfilling involves, dig and haul. We're fortunate in a sense in the United States since we have such a large amount of real estate that we could move it from one area to another to controlled landfills and incinerators. However, more and more incinerators are closing down and waiting times for landfill are starting to really stack up. And even if you send it out to these two things, perpetual risk remains. True cost, the full elimination, it's unknown. And I'm not just talking about cost of financial, I'm talking about cost of the environment and cost to communities. So if you've been following the US news lately, you probably heard of Palestine, Ohio. This has hit hard, hit home quite a bit. Vinyl chloride was in these trains, derailed, it burned, creating dioxins in some areas. And they tried to do dig and haul also, and this is a truck that, one of the truck that flipped over. So I said, dig and haul to landfills has its own potential risk, because now this is a very expensive way of changing a zip code or address to the chemical contamination. Is also spreading the risk to other communities as you're transporting it. So how we started, as I said, in the confines of NASA. I was a space payload flight engineer between 2007 to 2012. And I was fortunate to work with some brilliant people within the space industry, particularly Dr. Jackie Quinn, Dr. Phil Maloney, and Dr. Bobby DeVore. My last project with them was actually a lunar rover program to create water from the moon using lunar regolith. But when I left in 2012, I learned about their other technologies that they developed, such as the Spears technology. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And through the NASA Technology Transfer Program and a partnership with Rollins College, where I mentor a lot of MBA students to work with NASA to take these technologies and commercialize it, I found the other technology that Dr. Quinn and Dr. Phil and Dr. DeVore created, which was the Spears technology. And you see here in the center picture. That technology is an in situ polymer filled with a reagent that we deploy into sediments to extract PCBs and other chlorinated contamination, and we're now testing it out for PFAS as well as PAHs, like a sponge. And if you ever come to Florida and see Florida mangroves, very similar effect. We're just using biomimicry here to absorb chemical contamination to slow down the uptake into the food web. It is a form of remediation also, but it's a long-term remediation since it is a passive kinetic process. We'll talk a little bit about that technology in a second. The other technology is the AMTS, an activated metal treatment system. It's also an in situ process, and I'm encouraged to actually look into this technology and how it could be applied globally, because this is an in situ paste or plaster that can be applied to painted surfaces or concrete contaminated with PCB due to a leakage, where it can extract it from the concrete. Once it's extracted and we've tested the concrete or paint it's now free of PCB, we can dechlorinate that system or that byproduct using a different technology. And then the other technology that Dr. Quinn invented is EZVI. This is an in situ emulsified zero valent metal that we pump into groundwater. One of the widely licensed technology within the NASA Center. From an EcoSpheres perspective, we're going to focus on 3 transformative technologies that we've developed. We have attained the exclusive license to the NASA Spears sediment technology. And throughout the years, we've developed soil treatment systems because of the needs of our clients. They've asked us, they have sediment contamination, but they've also had upland issues as well as groundwater. So because of their needs, we took the sustainability principles and chemistry and applied it to other type of deployments, such as soil extraction, which we call Eco-INA. INA means land in Hawaiian. The EcoSpheres is a sediment, and then the EcoCube technology, or elimination solution. This is an on-site, on-demand, scalable modular UV solution to destroy and degrade PCBs from solvent, water, or transform oils. These are just some of the locations that we've deployed our technology since we started as a company. COVID slowed us down a bit because the world shut down, but we've been focusing most of our efforts in the Southeast and Southwest Pacific, as well as the Northwest of the United States, primarily because their options to eliminate these contaminations required transporting from Guam all the way to mainland US. As you can imagine, that is very, very costly, and the CO2 or the carbon footprint associated with that type of environmental effort, I don't know, it's a trade-off. Clean soil for clean air. And we prefer to do everything on site so we don't have that carbon generation. So the SPEARS technology is an in-situ sediment deployment solution, primarily to extract these chlorinated contaminations from pore water and sediments. This is the technology that Lee called upon earlier, and we are humbled by this, by IPEN and introducing, being part of this, this panel, and how we can utilize our technologies, non-combustion technologies, especially an extraction one for sediments, to better the world. This was post-validated by NASA between 2015 and 2017. And it works really, really good in high-level concentrations. That's what NASA found. It removed up to 85% contamination from sediment and pore water within a 9-month period. They didn't extend the test further than that. So we've always wondered how we would do, and clients have always asked us how we would do for sediment sites that are lower concentrations. This site was in particular 74 to 150 parts per million. And since then, after we've exclusively licensed the technology, we've commercialized this and deployed it into other applications, such as part of a delineation study. This study was utilized in Guam with a US federal client, where we wanted to test out the capabilities of SPEARS, not just on PCBs, and being able to identify the point source of the PCB within this coastline. But we also wanted to test out if it can also absorb, without discriminating, DDT from the area. And this study, after 6 months of deployment, it did. The results encouraged us and encouraged our clients. It also showed us exactly where the PCBs were, because they were finding in high levels within their fish tissue samples. And the phase 2 to this one will require for us to deploy a SPEARS curtain, what we call a curtain, around the pier and the coastline to slow down the uptake into the food web. This study was in partnership with Port of San Diego. And what's really unique about the Port of San Diego is they wanted another solution because for their low-level contamination within the harbor, and be able to do it without dredging. What's most important also is that once we deploy the SPEARS underwater and under the harbors and the marina, as you can imagine, this is a heavily boat-trafficked area. Once deployed, it did not impact the economy above surface. And that's really important for the port economy. Because if you were to dredge this area would be shut down for 3 to 6 months at a time. By deploying the SPEARS, we're able to absorb the contamination as part of a reconstructive process long-term to absorb just the contamination from the environment. This other pilot study that we've deployed with a utility client in the Anacostia River, that's in the Washington, D.C. area. This is a study to also further understand SPEARS in a different sediment condition, a much more oily, much more mucky or muddy flat by the river to slow down the further movement of PCBs down the river. This study was deployed mid last year and it will actually be completed in June this year. And we're already encouraged and getting some amazing results from this one. So far, after a 6-month study, we've removed 50% from the pore water within the area. The EcoINA treatment solution, this is another on-site treatment solution. It's a conventional soil washing process with a solvent washing process to follow. But what's unique about this one, and the reason why we actually initially developed the EcoCube technology, was we utilized the EcoCube or UV technology to repurpose our soil, our water, and our solvent as part of the soil washing process. That way, we don't have to bring a one-to-one ratio of soil that we have to treat to the contaminate or to the solvent that we have to bring on site, which is very, very costly. So this allowed us for us to optimize the system and the process, and allowed for us to get to levels that our clients and the regulators have never seen before. This is a sample that we did with sediments, works on sediments too, you just have to dry sediments first. 100 parts per million, we got down to below 1 part per million. The threshold in sediments and with US EPA is 2 parts per million. This is a case study for another site in Guam with our federal client. Here we start with the extraction process, which is a soil treatment process on the left. We went from 22 parts per million down to less than 2 parts per million after a few cycles. And then we took that solvent and went through a stripping process or dechlorination process using our UV. And we went from around 2.5 parts per million down to non-detect levels. This is a graph of multiple sites within Guam, several sites in Guam and Hawaii area. And what we wanted to show here is, doesn't matter what level of concentration or baseline concentration you're starting with, doesn't matter what soil characteristics you're starting with, we'll get that PCB out of that soil. The EcoCube process is the remediation destruction technology, originally, again, developed for our soil treatment process and our Spears process to clean the solvent that's inside. But a client of ours in the Northwest who had an impacted groundwater system wanted to utilize this technology to treat their groundwater, low-level contamination. So we developed a 50-gallon per minute system, also another scalable system. Inside this unit, there are 2 100-gallon tank reactors that we've optimized with more energy so that we can actually increase the flow rate. And if the client wanted to do a 200-gallon per minute system, it would require 4 of these technologies side by side. Since then, we've now pivoted this technology or expanded technology to start looking into treating transformer oils as well as landfill leachate. We're encouraged of a new project that's coming about for landfill leachate contaminated with PFAS that's going to be starting in July this year with our partner from Black & Veatch. And we're looking to see some really good results with this one to be a part of that component of the treatment train for PFAS remediation. This graph here shows what the EcoCube can do, a smaller reactor can do. When we spike mineral oil with roughly around 500 parts per million of PCB, and within a few hours, we hit non-detect levels. Again, this is a small continuous batch system with a very low dosage of lighting or lamp inside. And to optimize and to increase the flow rate of the system, because 2 hours is not fast enough for us, we've increased the energy that's inside the reactor to do a lot more and a lot faster. And our client in the Northwest of the United States, their levels were somewhere around 244 nanograms per liter. Their threshold there was around 44 nanograms per liter. This continuous batch process also got us down to somewhere between 13 to 19 nanograms per liter. So also accomplishing the threshold needed. We're also testing out this system for 1,4-dioxane and other POPs. I like 1,4-dioxane quite a bit because I could destroy it really, really fast within 10 minutes. And we're starting to look also at advanced pharmaceuticals, specifically in key regions of the US where there's high levels of pharmaceuticals in drinking water. So we still face an ongoing issue with PCBs. We still got to get through the 83% that Lee mentioned. But we have to do this. We have to do this together, and we need to try to do this fast because there's more contamination coming. And the reason why we do this under EcoSpears is because we're a little biased. Unlike my colleagues, the space industry, they're looking towards the red planet. We're a little biased on this blue planet, so we hope we can join forces with everybody here to solve and tackle this problem forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our final speaker will be joining us online. That will be Dr. Douglas Hallett. I don't know if Doug wants to introduce himself first, but then I'm gonna try to make the technology work from here to show a video.
Good morning. I'm Doug Hallett. I am the CEO of True Energy Incorporated, and I'm going to show a short video or documentary this morning on our experience with a process that Lee Bell introduced as gas phase reduction, gas phase chemical reduction. We've now developed it into a process where you can use the word hydrogen, and we call it hydrogen reduction. And I would emphasize to you, we've been trying to bring the cost down of destruction of high hazard chemicals like PCBs. I've worked in this field since 1972. That's how old I am. Still pretty viable. And the return on investment of our equipment now, because we're able to make hydrogen out of this kind of waste, even though we use hydrogen going in, it's a cyclic chemical process. The return on investment is about 2 years, which is very favorable. You can make money, not just with the tipping fee, but you can make money with the gas you produce. All of the gas we produce is useful, and we can make it all into hydrogen if we choose to. With that, I think you should show the video.
According to the Government of Canada, Randall Reef in Hamilton Harbour is the largest contaminated sediment site on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes. It is a huge cancer-causing coal tar blob that has been built up over 150 years of steelmaking, and it's been labeled an area of concern for the last 40 years, and it still hasn't been removed. Back in 1990, Douglas Hallett brought his patented first prototype toxic waste eliminator to Hamilton Harbour. This apparatus processed nearly 10 tons of dredged toxic sludge from Randall Reef. The sludge was not incinerated nor buried. The toxics were eliminated in Hallett's process. All of the PCBs and carcinogenic polyaromatic hydrocarbons were converted into methane, hydrogen, and carbon monoxide.
This result was tested, certified, and published by the United States Environmental Protection Agency and following the EPA testing protocols. 6.9's destruction removal efficiency. That means that 99.9999% of the toxic material was removed. 6.9's. Hamilton Harbour in 1992, 30 years ago.
The same engineered system that achieved those results was then moved to Bay City, Michigan. Industrial waste, contaminated with PCBs and chlorinated solvents, was processed as part of a U.S. EPA technology evaluation program. The results again were excellent, the gold standard, 6.9's. Yet, in spite of these results, Hallett was unable to gain federal and/or Government of Ontario support to scale up his processor and finally clean up Hamilton Harbour. Instead, he had to take this technology here to Western Australia, where he did receive government support. Australia had collected all the high-strength PCBs from across the country and brought them to Hallett's new industrial-sized processor. This machine destroyed more than 2,000 tons of PCBs, measured as pure chemical. The destruction efficiency removal, once again, 6.9's.
Once again, the EPA testing protocols proved conclusively that the entire inventory of PCBs from across Australia were destroyed, 99.9999%. This result was certified and published by our client, the Government of Australia.
Next stop, St. Catharines, Ontario, the General Motors engine plant. General Motors had collected all the high-strength PCBs from their facilities across Canada and brought them to Hallett's processor. In this installation, hundreds of tons of both PCBs and contaminated soil containing both coal tar and PCBs were destroyed.
Well, you've heard this before. The destruction removal efficiency was 99.9999% as certified and published by the province of Ontario. This was the largest remediation of industrial PCB contamination in Canada, and it was originated and paid for by General Motors.
Since then, Douglas Hallett returned to his career as an environmental consultant and continued to develop and patent new advances in the hydrogen reduction process he had invented. Yet still, governments in Canada prefer to bury contaminated waste rather than eliminate it or convert it to energy using Hallett's process.
Yes, these results were achieved 25 to 30 years ago, but the laws of chemistry haven't changed. Governments now say they are going to bury Randall Reef contaminants because containment is a known technology. My process, hydrogen reduction, is not a concept. It is proven. And in the years since, I have changed and patented significant parts of this process to maximize the production of hydrogen. Hydrogen is now valuable. We can convert 99.9999% of Randall Reef, the contaminants there, and turn it into hydrogen and sell that hydrogen and make a profit doing it.
So back to you.
Thank you very much. It is time for our Q&A, as you have been waiting for. For practical reasons, I would like to invite questions or comments to Doug first, so we can, since we have him online and the technology is working, that's just the easiest way to do it. That goes both for online and in-room participants. So please, any questions or comments on our last presentation? Don't be shy. It seems that it was all self-explanatory. I will then open it up. Oh, there is a question.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, the presenter. My question is to the companies that may be presenting this on-site technology, given the importance of the proximity principle within the Basel Convention, and considering that this technology that need to be deployed in many countries that the PCB has been used. What is the effort they are doing to bring this to other regions other than their headquarters? I'm thinking of the technology base in US. how many offices have you in the global south to maybe sell this technology or propose this to the government to destroy PCB and also the contaminated soil by the POPs? This is my question. It should be practical to have this information close to the country that need them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please go ahead, Doug.
I come from a history with government service in Canada and internationally with Canada-US work on toxic chemicals, and worked extensively in the Netherlands, and of course in Australia and Japan. This technology, we are the technology developer, and we are prepared to deploy and sell units or deploy units worldwide now. And Alex Mihalovic is representing us there in the room. He can speak to you about this, but our business is essentially making these units. This process needs to be very specifically run. It runs well, obviously, from the video that you've seen, but you have to run it precisely. It's like flying an airplane. And we do use hydrogen at low pressure, not at high pressure. It's not dangerous. We've cited this in communities, and we have a permit to run in downtown Toronto in Canada. But we're prepared to deploy units around the world. And if you're interested, you can either write to me or speak to Alex, and we'll be glad to discuss this with you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Answer is yes.
Yes.
We've focused our effort in the mainland US for the first part of the startup years. Now that we are expanding our territories, we go to where the needs are. And you also have to understand how we came about on developing on-site technologies. Because as you could probably imagine, sending stuff to space is really, really expensive, especially when it gets really big and really heavy. So we took that component of engineering and logistics and incorporate it to what we do. So everything that we develop is scalable and modular. Everything's all on site, and if I could fit it inside a Connex box, it will be at your backyard. With a caveat, because sustainability also means not only improving the environment, but also educating the future generation. We're dealing with a generational impact. So when it comes down to delegates and governments out there, Ecospheres is very much open to working with other governments and building abilities to educate our youth that there's other types of careers out there in sustainability and the environmental world outside of just the conventional, I'm Filipino, right? So I'm either a doctor, a nurse, or a lawyer. I just became an engineer. So I want to provide opportunities for these children and up and coming innovators. Because the only way to solve the future is to, and predict it, is to build it and innovate. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I have a question from our online audience that is to both the latest presenters, and that is, does these technologies treat all POPs with the same efficiency and at the same concentrations? Or does it have certain limits that makes its efficiency better or worse? And also, in addition to that, is the treatment in water better, or is it in sediments? And I think that is specifically to you. But maybe we can start with Doug just on the first part about the efficiency of the technology.
Our technology, there is a write-up on it in the with the Basel Convention people. It's written by John Vigan. It's 14 pages long and it covers every chemical we've run, including PFAS, chemical weapons, and a lot of PCBs and dioxin. But I don't know how many the list is. It's quite extensive. So you should look at that. It's available online. Everything is destroyed. Any organic chemical can be destroyed with this. And we've done it and we have data on it. In terms of commercial success, you have to realize that our first work on with the EPA was on a Superfund site in Michigan, and that site had all sorts of chemicals in it. Hamilton Harbor has all sorts of chemicals in it, and all of them are converted now into hydrogen for resale. We don't have any emission to the environment, but what we do produce is contained and is a valuable product now in selling hydrogen or methane or and carbon is the final products of this. This is, I think you should realize that our process, these different processes are all important, and we deal with the high concentration stuff. Other people deal with the lower concentration stuff, and we have experience in both areas, but it's efficient to use many technologies when you're cleaning up a site, and you have to appreciate that. And I appreciate what the other speakers talking about, and I applaud you for doing that. Thank you.
So for my part, I'll answer it twofold. On the first part of the question, I've always, as an engineer, especially an aerospace engineer, I've always never to use the word always and never. So when it comes down to different types of chemicals, different concentration levels, we've done quite a bit of studies already, both internal treatability studies and on-site pilot programs, where we have shown the effectiveness of the technology. So in 2 words, it works. When it comes down to proving it for your site, your sediments, and your soil, that's where pilot programs come into play. And that's the reason why we've leveraged a lot of our partners and client partners to utilize the technology and evaluate it for their site conditions. When it comes down to the Spears technology, more particularly to the Spears sediment and pore water technology, we found that the Spears does not discriminate with the contaminants that we've actually deployed it in. We've deployed it on contaminants of PCBs and DDT in Guam. The site that we did in Umeå, Sweden, with Umeå University and Swedish Geotechnical Institute, that was a site contaminated with PCBs, dioxins, and PAHs, and it's not discriminating there either. So the best way to understand it and to understand its efficiency is to try it. So call us for some pilots.
Please go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, hi. In the presentation of Mr. Bell, he presented different non-combustion technologies, including the Philippines. But I'd like to know with IPEN whether there is a publication that's showing the different non-com technologies that are being used by different countries, and maybe looking at the success of these different technologies. In terms of concentration, what is the normal parameters that could be addressed by these technologies, non-combustion?
Thank you for that question. We don't provide publications showing which countries are using the various technologies. We are aware of several that are currently using them. The situation changes rapidly between the technology developers, so they're often entered into commercial in confidence deals with different governments and private operators. But there is a long history of the use of non-combustion technologies by different countries. I know the BCD PCD technology is licensed in many different countries, and it was operating in Australia, Mexico, and several others. There's the PCB dechlorination plant I mentioned operating in the Philippines, as well as a part, which is an excellent process, operating as a part of the technology transfer and funding program, I believe, through the GEF. They come and go. One of the issues we've seen is that technologies destroy stockpiles, and then they move on, or they go into a period where they have to wait until they can arrange for further opportunities to come up. There was more recently in Tajikistan, I believe, a program being developed to destroy a 5,000-ton DDT stockpile using supercritical water. I'm not sure of the progress with that at this point, but I think that these different programs are being developed with the assistance of UNIDO in many cases, and that they actually have ongoing programs, which I would actually like to see them raise more awareness about, particularly in this environment, so that delegates are able to access those programs and look at the different technologies that are being used. There was also a series of long-term trials in, my pronunciation might be poor, but Bien Hoa in Vietnam, former US Air Force base, where they stockpiled Agent Orange with dioxin contamination. Quite a range of different non-combustion technologies were trialled at that site successfully, including mechanochemical destruction, and I believe their destruction efficiencies were very high. So I'm not clear whether the final tender has been let for the cleanup of that site, but I know that there was several successful pilot programs run on that site. Yeah. Thank you.
We have a question from the back in purple. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kwame Ofori from Ghana, a member of IPEN as well. My question goes to Gripsins. In connection with your research that you did, is there any mechanism that you also advise when you had these issues with the plastics, recycling of plastics? Did you have any mechanism of retrieving them from the system? At the same time with the X, did you go back to those that you picked from them to tell them the effect of what is being found? That's my question. Thank you.
Sorry, is that to me?
It's for Gripsins.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. Yes, my answer is that this is just the preliminary findings of this report, and we are in the process of disseminating this information. In fact, the first point of dissemination was to discuss at national level with the authorities, different stakeholders in preparation for the BRS, and also to inform the policy processes around development of various policies and laws. Then we are here, then we expect to report back this information. So I take it as a suggestion, which we will take forward. And we're in that, we have that plan. Thank you.
I am going to read a question from our online audience, and I see there are more questions in the room. And this is for Doug. What are the highest concentrations that can be treated? And can you explain the cost of the treatment?
We've run pure chemical, pure PCBs, DDT, crystalline hexachlorobenzene contaminated with parts per thousand dioxin in still bottoms. And we've run what I call neat or pure chemical warfare agents and explosives like TNT and RDX. There's you can run pure chemical if you need to. Most chemicals that you deal with in the waste field are mixtures, and we're not afraid of dealing with mixtures. they work fine as well. The expense of this, now you have to consider destroying the chemical, and there's a tipping fee for that. And we generally run at market or slightly below that. I am a businessman. I'm not going to discuss our costs, but we always are competitive. And we now have the advent of selling the gas from this system, which if you're looking at the expense of purchasing a plant, these plants are modular. They come in, we can deal with 50 tons a day of material in a module as bone dry tons in the engineering term. And, but really, these plants don't have a cost to them. They actually make money now. And that's a hard concept. It's something that I've worked my whole career to develop. But you can take an area like Hamilton Harbor, you can take a large inventory of PCBs and destroy that material, but you're really converting it into hydrogen for sale. And that hydrogen now can be put through a GE combined cycle turbine and made into electricity. It can be used in the steel industry to in the steel reduction process. It can be used in the transportation industry. And that is our goal. These are small modular plants. There's always waste. There's always waste where people live. This is where you need energy, you need electricity, you need hydrogen hubs to supply hydrogen for the new transportation industry, which will be used in shipping, it will be used in rail transportation, and it will also be used in automobiles.
Thank you very much. And perhaps, sir, you can also say a bit about the cost for your technique.
I love cost questions. Faster, better, cheaper. That's a good answer. You guys all know what the cost of shipping contamination PCBs from your respective countries to other countries to be incinerated. You're converting it from transformer oil to now vapor, to now CO2. Are you calculating the cost of that? Right? Are we truly calculating the cost in this closed volume environment we call the planet? We showed that picture earlier about the train derailment and the truck flipping. Are we calculating the cost to the environment? And are we calculating the cost to these communities? Because we are on site, it's going to be faster, better, cheaper. Hopefully that answers it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have promised to finish the side event at 2:45. That is in 5 minutes, but I will take the liberty to promise that the speakers will stay on for a little bit and chat to anyone who has further questions. We're aware of that contact groups are starting at 3 again, so we will have more opportunities to discuss more technical details there. But before we close, I would like to invite Lee for any closing message.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah. I know the focus of many of the delegates and negotiators here is on technical guidelines, and I would just like to say again that you will be able to see some of the performance characteristics, particularly for hydrogen reduction, and it's listed under gas phase chemical reduction, which was its original listing name in the general technical guidelines. But I'd like the audience also to be open to the concept that we need to move more non-combustion technologies into those guidelines. And there are many out there. You've heard about at least one of them today, but there are others that need to be considered. And we need to be more flexible as delegates in the negotiations to make sure we actually introduce more advanced technologies, and that we make more clear the implications of using the old technologies such as incineration and cement kilns, which perpetuate the POPs release cycle into the environment. And for reasons that I've explained previously about the proximity principle, we need to provide more clean technology to the global south. We need to reduce transport, and I think that we need to actually focus a lot more on the future of decontamination of the planet in a localized and regionalized setting, rather than this vast movement of POPs waste to the north. So I think that we have a role to play as delegates in trying to achieve that. But I'd also like to say that IPEN will continue to monitor the developments of non-combustion technologies and bring them to the awareness of the convention. And I would also just like to thank both Sergi and his team for coming today, and also for Doug Hallett for taking the time to appear online and explain some more about the history and the nature of hydrogen reduction. And I'd hope that all of you will look further into these technologies and how they might be applied in your countries. Thank you very much.
And I will take the opportunity to thank all speakers, both here and online. I would like to thank all the participants, and I also would like to thank the Geneva Environment Network, who has been fantastic in helping us set up this. Thank you so much for all your guidance and help. And I think we can give all the we have one more message. You have 1 minute, Griffins.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to share this publication of the executive summary of the report, which we made some copies, and they are available at the IPEN booth, and also was outside if you want to access and learn more about the findings of this study in the country. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Griffins. And don't forget to visit the IPEN booth. We have that material and a lot of other materials that you might enjoy. And I think we are on time. So maybe we can just end with a clap for our speakers today.